Hello and welcome back to another episode of Taking Control of Cancer, the podcast brought to you by the North East London Cancer Alliance. I'm Steve Bland, and think of this podcast as a bit of a how-to guide to help you overcome common myths, fears and barriers to cancer prevention, diagnosis, treatment and care. We want to provide both patients and healthcare professionals, in fact, however cancer affects you, we want to give you tangible things that you can do to help when it comes to cancer, because while we know that not all cancers are preventable, there are things we can all do that can make a really positive difference to the health and well-being of our family, our friends and our colleagues. In this episode, we are talking about pancreatic cancer, everything that you need to know about pancreatic cancer. And to do that, we've gone along to the Pancreatic Cancer UK offices. And my guests today are Alfie Bailey-Bearfield, who's Head of Influencing and Health Improvement here at Pancreatic Cancer UK, and Rishi Athwal, who's the Early Diagnosis Project Manager at the North East London Cancer Alliance. So Alfie, Rishi, thank you so much for joining me. Alfie, before we dive into the facts and the figures and getting some of the picture on pancreatic cancer, can you just tell me a little bit about your role and how you got into this?
Yeah, definitely. So I head up the team at Pancreatic Cancer UK, and I focus on policy, public affairs and campaigning across the UK. And I guess I got into it because I felt like it was a real injustice, to be honest. I didn't know much about pancreatic cancer. I'm fortunate to not have personal experience myself, although I do have experience of cancer in my life, as lots of people do. And I had just come out of government and working on COVID policy, and I was absolutely appalled by the stats, just honestly reading through the job description, that we still lived in 2022, I think it was, and things hadn't changed since the 70s. It felt pretty appalling, and so I wanted to be a part of starting to change that. And in pancreatic cancer, we often talk about kind of historic nihilism around this disease. And that felt like a real motivator in terms of trying to play my part in overcoming it.
I guess we should probably address a question that maybe some people listening are asking of what is the pancreas and what is pancreatic cancer?
Yeah, so the pancreas is a really vital organ that we have, and the pancreas is really important in digesting food and also in the production of insulin. And what happens when a tumour grows in your pancreas, which is located behind a bunch of organs in your body, is it stops working properly, which results in people often being malnourished, not getting the right nutrients in their body, losing a lot of weight, and that's typically what happens. And I guess the location of the organ itself is quite challenging to clinicians because it's not easy to get in there. It's not easy to find out what's going on, and it's also really invasive when you have surgery because it's located behind a lot of other organs in your body.
And if a tumour kind of means that the organ doesn't work, does the impact of that mean that a lot of cancers are then, when they are detected a bit later, they've caused a real problem and perhaps you're into an A&E situation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think a lot of people I've spoken to have ended up only getting diagnosed at A&E because they've lost a ton of weight, because they're jaundiced, and I would like to say that that's a rare occasion, but unfortunately around 60% are getting diagnosed in an emergency setting, which is awful for people and their families because by that point very often it's too late to do anything. People are too frail, too unwell, and it's often metastasized. But I guess the other part of it is it's not good for the healthcare system. Yeah. We're trying to reduce the number of people who are going to A&E, and we're trying to make sure that actually people get the care they need in primary care because that's the best place for them and the best place for the system. And unfortunately, that's just not the reality for most people with pancreatic cancer in the UK today.
Rishi, your stat for North East London is a bit better than 60% though, isn't it?
Yes, well, the data that I have suggests that it was 19%, I think, presenting at primary care and 44% in presenting as in A&E. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess, ideally the way it works is you go and see your GP, they correctly identify that there's something potentially very wrong. and then send you off to CT scans, and you get that sorted within 21 days. The reality of that is it's unfortunately not happening. So there is best practice out there, guidance suggesting that local systems should be diagnosing people within 21 days. But we know that the reality of that is just not happening across the board. And that does need to change, because every day matters with pancreatic cancer. It's an incredibly aggressive tumour type once it develops, and that means that the difference a week can make is huge to someone's ability to have a high quality of life and hopefully live longer and spend valuable time with their friends and family.
So let's talk about some of the stats then, because you guys sent over some facts and figures earlier in the week, and they were really, really, really shocking. And I worked in cancer for a little while, done a lot of podcasting, and I don't think I've ever really talked about pancreatic cancer. It's the deadliest common cancer, affecting 10,700 people across the UK every year. Only around 7% of people diagnosed will live beyond 5 years. Over half the people with pancreatic cancer will die within 3 months of diagnosis. And actually, one of the most shocking things was that survival rates for pancreatic cancer have barely improved in 50 years. Why have they not improved? And actually, how rare is that across the spectrum of cancers?
Yeah, it's really rare. I think a lot of cancer types have seen significant improvements, which is fantastic. But unfortunately, cancers like pancreatic, brain tumour, lung haven't seen those same improvements. I think a big part of that is the challenge around early detection. Pancreatic cancer has really vague symptom presentation, and that means that it's really hard for people to recognise that they might have pancreatic cancer. And at the same time, it's also really difficult, for stretch GPs who might be seeing thousands of people with similar symptom combinations, that it's really hard for them to identify it might be pancreatic cancer. And as a result, you end up with people being diagnosed far too late, often without any sort of treatment possibility. And that's the thing we really need to change if we're going to start to shift the dial here.
So what are the treatment possibilities if you do catch these cancers early? What might a patient face, and how good are the treatment options?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is the treatment options also need to improve. So, if you're lucky enough to get diagnosed at an early stage, you can have curative surgery. That in itself is, very hard on the body, which is why we need to make sure that we're catching people as early as possible so they're as fit as possible. There's also chemotherapy, which can be life-extending. But part of the problem is there's never been a treatment developed just for pancreatic cancer.
Right.
So it's been repurposed, it's very toxic and very outdated. And so, I currently think about it like this. We absolutely need to, treat people better, find better treatment options. But the first thing we need to do is diagnose people earlier, because that's, 80% of people are getting diagnosed at a late stage, at which point, almost no one gets a shot at treatment at all at the moment.
We'll come on to some of the amazing work that you guys are doing, but why is it like this? Because, we talk in this podcast so often about the amazing treatments that have come up for different cancers, and yet we're talking about one here that, barely improved in 50 years, the survival rates. Is it a lack of investment? Is it just a more difficult nut to crack? Like, what is it?
I think it's a really nuanced picture, and you touched some of, the very valid reasons why it's been left behind. I think, and I'd say this as a policy nerd and as someone who worked in the civil service, but policy is often made to cater to, big demographics, very often the kind of lowest hanging fruit. So, what's the easiest thing to solve? Let's solve that.
Yeah.
And that means that the investment, the research, the focus continues along one line while others get left behind. However, I didn't grow up in the UK, I grew up in Belgium, which is one of the much better places if you're going to get cancer to get cancer.
Yeah.
We're currently 27th in the UK out of 29 comparable OECD countries in terms of survival for pancreatic cancer.
Wow.
So we could not be doing much worse than we are currently doing. That at the same time gives me a lot of hope, because it's not just the lack of treatments, it's also how the NHS is or isn't working for these cancer types.
Yeah.
So as part of the National Cancer Plan development, we've been talking to a bunch of different countries to understand why is Denmark doing twice as well as we are.
Yeah.
And some of that is actually the health of the health system, how it's getting people through. Pancreatic cancer is a really aggressive disease, and so any extra time that you're waiting, that you're not being able to be seen, that you can't get your scan, that's going to have a life or death, that's going to be life or death potentially. Yeah. So we need to fix the health system to fix pancreatic cancer as well.
Rishi, it's pretty embarrassing, pretty depressing, that, isn't it? 27th out of 29. And some of these stats that we're seeing here.
Yeah, the numbers are shocking, to be honest. I've not been working on pancreatic cancer for too long, and I think when I first saw them, it certainly did shock me in terms of the survival rates, in terms of how late people were being found and presenting. It's certainly something that we need to be doing something actively about in terms of trying to find people earlier. And thankfully we have got a few things going on that will hopefully try and help us do that. So one of the key things that we've just currently starting across the country really, so it's an NHS England funded pilot project, which is to try and help find some of these cancers earlier within general practice. So now that we know that there's a link between pancreatic cancer and new onset diabetes, right. There's now a pilot that's starting to take place where we're going to start case finding in GP records to try and find these patients that have had new onset diabetes. And the thing with these patients is when they've got pancreatic cancer, rather than their weight increasing, it actually their weight falls, so they have weight loss, so unexpected weight loss. So by trying to find these patients early that have new onset diabetes, experiencing weight loss, we can then hopefully put them through the system and try and get them diagnosed a lot quicker. So it's a really interesting piece of work. It's very early on, so we're just sort of starting it, but it'll be really interesting to see if this is something that can sort of help us try and shift that dial a bit in terms of trying to find people earlier. And I think it's going to take a lot of work like this to try and, I guess, do things slightly differently, test out what works. I think, it may well be that this doesn't work as well as we hope, but we need to be testing different things and piloting different approaches to try and find these people earlier and try and improve outcomes for people, really.
I was just going to say, I think that's one of the really exciting things about where we're at. So in addition to, all the reforms happening to the NHS, it's we seem to be in an age now where we're thinking more creatively and with all the technological advancements in AI about how we can proactively find people. So with a disease like pancreatic cancer where, the symptoms aren't going to change, actually we need to think creatively about how we reach out and find those people. So whether it's new onset diabetes or inherited disease, we do have more evidence coming through about how we can pick up different groups quicker.
So what are the symptoms then? We've touched on a couple, but if we do want to get this thing early, people should know the symptoms to look out for. So what are the things to look out for?
Yeah, definitely. So it's a combination of things. Typically it presents as back pain, stomach ache, changes to your poo, indigestion. And I guess what I would say is, in addition to those symptoms, we do know that 1 in 10 pancreatic cancer cases are inherited. But most people don't know that pancreatic cancer can be inherited in a similar way to breast cancer with genetic mutations, etc. And so, if you have more than one family member on one side of the family, then it's worth thinking about and looking into whether you might be at higher risk.
Rishi talked about GPs a little bit there and the pilot that you're working on. It's a tough gig for GPs, this, isn't it? Because some of those symptoms you talked about, we've been here talking about bowel cancer, we've talked about neuroendocrine cancer in terms of people going back to the GP and saying there's something wrong, you're not finding it. We don't want to push people to be saying, I don't trust their GPs, but it's a really tough gig for GPs, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's where, firstly, if you think that there's something wrong and you know that you have a sense of what's going on with your body, be your own advocate, make sure that you're pushing for what you need in the health system, I guess, to say also, if you're worried about pancreatic cancer, we've got a support line of specialist nurses who give really great information. And I suppose we're trying to tackle the challenge that GPs face head on. So we're currently funding some really exciting research at Imperial College called VAPOR, and it's essentially going to be a breath test. And I say it's really exciting because this breath test, which is, it's super simple technology. I say this not as a scientist, so easy for me to say. But essentially you breathe into a bag, and they've developed, essentially a way of chemically detecting changes to your breath.
Wow.
And hopefully, if it's proven to be successful, that's the type of thing that could be really game-changing. Because, it's cheap, it's cost effective to the system, and it would be a triage tool that, you go into your GP's office, you have these vague symptoms, all of a sudden, you're being flagged up as being at high risk of pancreatic cancer, and then you can be sent to the right tests first time round. Like that, I think, is the type of thing that's really going to be game changing. That
could be amazing. You mentioned about family history. Family history is something that's come up an awful lot in the different podcasts that we've done. We've talked about different kind of cancers, and I think it's a really interesting topic because I don't think that many people would know their family history well enough to know that something that happened to a grandparent is relevant to them. So what family history should people be aware of? What other conditions, what other cancers are relevant in terms of distant relatives?
Yeah, so with pancreatic cancer, the evidence suggests that 1 in 10 pancreatic cancer cases can be inherited. So that basically means that you could be at higher risk if more than one family member on one side of the family. So, for example, if my dad had it and my granddad on my dad's side, then I could be at higher risk. But we have been developing something really exciting called the Family History Checker, which is essentially an online tool that helps you to identify and go through some of that. As you're saying, you're not necessarily going to be thinking about it, to understand, different things about your family and your past, and what you know about your family risk of pancreatic cancer. And then if you're flagged up as being at high risk, you get sent on to a study which is actually based in Liverpool. It's called EUROPAC.
Right.
And they basically monitor you on an annual basis. And the results that we're seeing are really positive in terms of picking up people earlier. I guess more broadly though, and again, maybe this is a really policy person type of response, I do think that there is, to your point, more and more evidence that some of these risks are similar across different cancer types. And I think, understandably, as evidence has come through about different cancers, programs and projects have been developed on individual cancer types. And actually, the more we know about this, the more I feel quite strongly that we need the NHS to be set up to catch multiple different types of risk much easier. Because if you're, at high risk of pancreatic cancer because of BRCA, then it might also be that there's a crossover with breast cancer. So in my opinion, we need to start thinking about these things much more agnostically to the tumour site specifically, and we need to be thinking about it more strategically, so we're trying to catch as much risk as possible as early as possible.
Much more proactively, I think. We talked about this with breast cancer screening the other week, where the guest brought up family history and brought up increased risk factors, and I said, well, what if you don't know? There's nothing in the system. There's nothing that's going to alert you to family history. Rishi, we all need to be more aware of our family history. But is there anything more we could do as a system to help people, understand what is relevant? And I mean, I don't know. You can't have records of. Or can you have records of your grandparents and your great-grandparents and all that kind of thing? It's a really tricky picture because I think it's definitely a bit of the jigsaw that's not quite there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly something where we've got gaps in recording, and I think, like we mentioned, it's really relevant to so many different types of cancer in terms of family history. I know we've talked about a few there, but another one that I'm working on is prostate as well, whereas obviously the family history is another risk factor there. And where we've got gaps in having that recording of family history, it means that we're just not picking people up who could potentially, let's say if you've got family history really well recorded, and then you present with some of these relatively vague symptoms as well, it just sort of it's another way of trying to help find these people earlier, isn't it? So it's certainly something that that we're aware of across the patch in North East London, but I mean nationally as well, is thinking about how do we try and improve the recording of family history. I know with EUROPAC specifically across North East London, when trying to promote that, so we've tried to promote that through the family history checker as well to to clinicians, but also the public, which has actually been taken up really well in North East London, so that's been fantastic. But also just, we've sent some guidance out to GPs just to say, let's one of the key bits of information on that was just to try and get people to ask about family history of pancreatic cancer, but just generally cancer in general, and try and get that recorded sort of consistently across the patch. And I certainly think that's a big piece of work that we need to think about as a system in terms of how we improve that.
So tricky because you only know what you know, don't you? And I think my mum's mum died from breast cancer, but I couldn't tell you whether she had the BRCA gene, whether she didn't, what kind of breast cancer it was. And I think, and I don't know, I'm posing a problem that I don't even know if there's an answer to, Alfie, but it's really important, isn't it, to understand your family history?
Yeah, it really is. And I think, the historical stuff you were just talking about in terms of your own experience, I there is a limitation to what we can now kind of uncover retrospectively. But I do think we can be really proactive, and also the system can be really proactive. For example, if someone gets diagnosed now, their healthcare professional might want to tell them if they've got kids to watch out and think about inherited risk. And it's not about making people feel really anxious, because with pancreatic cancer, for example, it's only 1 in 10, so it's not going to be everybody. And hopefully checking whether you're at inherited risk results in you finding out you're not. But making sure that as we move forward now and we understand more and we have better evidence, that we're being as proactive as we can is going to be really important, I think.
Do you get frustrated, Alfie? Because we've talked about, I mentioned other cancers, bowel cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer. I mentioned that we hadn't ever spoken about pancreatic cancer on our old BBC podcast. Obviously funding is at the lower end compared to other cancers, and the result is we have the stats that we have. Is it a source of frustration, or is it something that actually you look at and say this is an opportunity to really shift the dial on these things?
I think definitely the latter. It actually gives me a lot of hope that it can happen. If you look at cancer types like leukemia, which 20, 30 years ago were in a fairly similar spot to where pancreatic cancer is now, like the gains that you've seen with leukemia are incredible. And it shows that it can be done, both from a policy intervention perspective, the NHS centrally focusing on it, but also because they've seen a really sustained increase in research investment. And that takes a good 10, 15 years to come through. But then you do see mortality start to drop massively. So it gives me a lot of hope. And I would say this, but I genuinely mean it. It feels like the last 2 to 3 years there's been a huge change in terms of people talking about pancreatic cancer. I think partly that's because, as other cancer types become more survivable, which is great, this one becomes, more of a problem.
Stands out.
Yeah, it stands out really starkly. And, I think the stat is that in the next couple of years, pancreatic cancer is going to overtake breast for the 4th deadliest cancer in the UK. It's going to continue climbing until we start doing something about it. So for me, it feels like there's genuine momentum now. Whether it's the NHS working on the case finding pilot, the inherited risk programme that we're working on, and then also the upcoming National Cancer Plan, I think is a huge opportunity to start really changing the system.
There you go, Rishi, plenty of work to do.
As ever, there's always lots of work to do, but it's good to be working, with organisations like Pancreatic Cancer UK, where you can obviously see where we are now is not where we want to be, but there's sort of a passion to sort of move us and move the dial really and shift the dial to where we need to be. And I think some of the national work that's being done as well should hopefully help us shift that. And sometimes some of these things take a long time to happen. Our pilot, for instance, the case finding pilot is a 2-year pilot, at the end of which we'll have an evaluation, and then we'll see if it works, and if not, we need to do something else. But ultimately, we need to be starting to do these things and starting these processes, because without that, we're just going to stay stuck exactly where we are. And
speed it up a little bit.
Yeah.
As well, nothing moves quickly in the NHS, does it?
No, exactly, yeah.
2-year pilot, and then probably another couple of years of sifting over the results, and a few conference calls about it and a few meetings about it, and then all of a sudden you're 5 years down the line and you probably haven't actually seen really tangible results from it.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the key things with this is actually trying to put these pilots in place that can be, if they're proven to work and proven to be effective, that they're ready to be sort of pushed out at a national level, rather than thinking, actually, if we're putting a pilot in place, how will it then, even if it works, how would we do that nationally?
Yeah.
So I think it's having that forethought really to actually, with things like this, to actually be able to say, right, should this work, we're then ready to go, essentially, in terms of in pushing it out nationally. And that stops that big gap between evaluation results and then something actually happening about it. So,
Alfie, how have you found working in cancer compared to your other experience in the charity sector?
It's a good question. I think it's really fascinating, that because it feels like we're in a real golden age of science, and that the possibilities from things like AI and innovative tech like the breath test mean that we could genuinely be on the cusp of like this sort of thing that was science fiction 20-30 years ago. And I've worked on autism, learning disability and dementia, which are slightly different. And I think what's really different about cancer, and particularly pancreatic cancer, is that the system is currently not working. And that pancreatic cancer has been left behind. And so I think if we can start to, cut those waiting lists, get people through primary care, and then also start to develop some of the science that's going to overcome the barriers that we've been talking about, then, in the next 10 years, I feel really confident that we could double survival for pancreatic cancer.
So that's one of your guys' aims, isn't it, to double survival?
Yeah.
What are the other kind of bigger, more broader picture aims?
I think that's really the kind of North Star that we talk about,
Yeah.
Because, as you mentioned at the start of this conversation, currently it's 7% 5-year survival. That's pretty shocking.
Nowhere near good enough.
Yeah, and if you look at somewhere like Denmark, it's 14%, something like that. So that shows what can be done just by, getting people seen quicker, making sure people aren't having to wait way too long to get their treatment started, making sure they've got the right wraparound support. So, in addition to getting early detection right, one of the things that we're doing is working with the government and hopefully influencing the National Cancer Plan to change pathways, make them quicker. It's not the, really exciting science stuff, but actually, if we get the pathways right and if we make sure that they are faster for cancers like these, which are more aggressive, then we can get people a much better shot at surviving.
Is it tricky for you, as someone who is looking at policy and trying to influence, and you've got all the other charities and all the other cancer types who are trying to do the same thing, and you're all trying to fight for more funding, for more, more attention? How is that in terms of a challenge for you?
I think it's a really great sector, the cancer sector. We actually work together really well, which you might not think, because there's over 200 tumour types and hundreds, and I mean hundreds of cancer charities, nationally, locally. But I think we do a really good job of coming together, talking about the really big picture stuff that needs to be sorted, like making sure that, cancer alliances thrive, making sure that, overall cancer waiting times work, but then also finding the niche that we will have. So Pancreatic Cancer UK chairs the Less Survivable Cancers Task Force, which is a coalition of those more forgotten about cancers like brain tumour, esophageal and stomach. And then we also work with other coalitions like Cancer 52. And I think that's really important, actually, because going back to, if you're sitting there and you're the government, how are you going to create something that works for the system and for everybody? We can't have one programme for one specific disease over there we need to be thinking about what works across the board. And so I think it's the right thing to do for us to approach it like that as a cancer sector.
Yeah. Rishi, it's good for you guys. I imagine we've talked a lot on this pod about the work the Alliance does with different charities, not just Pancreatic Cancer UK. It's so important, isn't it, for you guys to work with the experts in the different fields?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, they've got absolute passion and knowledge to be able to help us move forwards and help us with a lot of the work that we're doing. I think working with the experts in the charities alongside sort of day-to-day on the ground with the clinicians at the hospitals that we work with is fantastic, really, and almost being able to sort of bring those together to try and help improve cancer pathways across North East London is fantastic.
Give us an idea of some of the other work that you guys are doing, not just in this particular cancer, but in terms of your role, your early diagnosis work, some other things that you're up to.
So I'm working on pancreatic and liver surveillance as well. So currently looking at how we can ensure that anybody who's high risk of liver cancer essentially is on a 6-monthly surveillance program, and making sure that we digitise that as well, so people get seen, essentially meaning people don't fall through the gaps of a spreadsheet. They're making sure that everybody's seen within their 6 months, so that these are people at high risk of essentially developing cancer, so they should be seen every 6 months, have a test, and make sure then we can increase their earlier diagnosis. The other things I'm sort of working on at the moment is around prostate, and prostate's an interesting one at the moment because there's no sort of national screening, so we're currently just in lieu of maybe a decision coming on that shortly, potentially we're looking at how we can increase people's knowledge around their risk. So we're doing some work with Prostate Cancer UK at the moment to essentially contact some patients who are more high risk of prostate cancer, and help them to understand their risk and give them more confidence to be able to then approach their GP and have a conversation about it, maybe get a PSA test if that's the right thing for them, and then a lot of awareness as well. So lots of things going on.
And Alfie, there's so much that you guys can look at for the other cancer type. We touched on it a minute ago, didn't we? But I imagine there's things that they're working on for other cancer types that you guys are probably thinking that's a really great thing to do as well.
Yeah, definitely. I guess the prostate example. When we were developing the family history checker, we absolutely were kind of inspired by the work that's happening in that space around familial risk and making sure that we're being, considerate of the fact that it can be really daunting, which I think you were just alluding to find out that you might be at risk of any type of cancer, let alone pancreatic cancer. I think that there's also so much that we can learn in terms of driving research investment into this space. And I think we were talking about earlier how you start to create momentum on a cancer like this, looking at examples like breast cancer, like leukemia, like prostate, and seeing actually how much has been achieved, and how you make researchers interested in the area, how you drive government investment, government focus on these areas. All of that has been super helpful because you're not starting from scratch.
Public awareness too, isn't it? Because I think you can't move, we're in October now, you can't move for breast cancer related stuff. It's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, isn't it? And it's how do you guys sort of get really into the public consciousness of this kind of cancer? And that's difficult, isn't it? Not just the research projects, which are all amazing, but how do you guys make a real impact on everyone in the street? How do you get the awareness up of not just the symptoms, but the fact that this is even some of these some of these extraordinary stats? I imagine they'd stop people in their tracks if you told them. How do you get that awareness of how serious this problem really is?
Yeah, it's a really big task, and I think we've been focusing a lot on how we do that. I don't think there's like a silver bullet to how you sort that out, but we were London Marathon Partner of the Year, which gave us huge amount of visibility.
You know what? I did the marathon, and you could not move for Pancreatic Cancer UK people. They were everywhere. Everywhere, because I did it for the Bowel Babe Fund for bowel cancer. who also have purple as their colour. Yeah. And every time I turned a corner, there was a massive purple group, and I was like, maybe this is our guy. No, it's not.
No, it's us
Pancreatic
again.
Cancer again.
Yeah.
Everywhere. They were everywhere. You made a real impression on that event.
Yeah, and I think we're one of the smaller charities to have ever got the charity partnership.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make sure that we could be as loud and as visible as possible.
You definitely were that.
So it was
definitely
fantastic. So that's part of it.
Yeah.
Another big part of my role, which we haven't really talked about, is the campaigning side.
Yeah.
And actually, partly because people unfortunately often die so quickly, it can be an experience that's kind of hidden.
Yeah.
Like people have this awful traumatic experience and then they're left not sure what to do. And
don't have the really emotional, amazing success stories.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we want to show those amazing success stories, but also give people a voice and empower them to share. And so both from a campaigning perspective and parliamentary perspective, we've been massively increasing our prevalence. So we do an increasing amount of political work, working across all the political parties to start to raise their attention to the challenges, and then also working with more and more supporters. So I think we had our biggest ever campaign to date this year. Nearly 270,000 people signed a petition, which we took to the government. And equally, we're working with more and more MPs who have personal experience, which is really amazing that they want to give us their time and talk about these issues publicly. We actually have an all-party parliamentary group, which is chaired by Paulette Hamilton MP.
Right.
And she's lost people to pancreatic cancer, and someone like her, going out and talking about this and raising attention to it is going to be really important in starting to shift the dial.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you made about, I think back to breast cancer, and you think of all the amazing stories that they can tell. But bowel cancer the same. If you've got such a low survival rate, you're just not going to have as many of those stories, are you? And that's such a chicken and egg thing, because you're not going to have those until you get the awareness up and you get the better treatments and better awareness, but you don't get that until you... Real big challenge. How much benefit did you see from doing something like the marathon? Because like I say, it was genuinely incredible. I actually remarked to someone afterwards, I can remember coming off the course, and one of the first things I said to people was like, geez, how many pancreatic cancer people were there? They were everywhere. But that's a big undertaking for a small charity like you guys. And what sort of benefit did you see from it?
I mean, it was huge. And it's so interesting working in my area, because you wouldn't necessarily think that you'd see an impact in my area either. But more and more people getting in touch with the charity, more attention on the campaign that we were running that I just mentioned, Diagnose, Save Lives. And then also more political attention, because you just had so much media focused on the day. And it's obviously, it's an event, it's a worldwide event that people pay attention to, isn't it? So for a cause like ours to receive attention like that is huge. And actually I realised the extent to which that made a difference, because I went to a conference a couple of months later in Europe, and it was like a pan-cancer event. Yeah. And they were like, oh, you guys were the focus of the London Marathon, and I was really shocked.
It was amazing, because I've done it 6 times now. And,
oh wow!
And there's always a charity partner, and honestly, there hasn't been one I can recall that's made as big an impact as you guys in terms of just sheer visibility. A number of people, it was everywhere.
Do you know what though? It was also a really good opportunity, and I think this is why there were so many of us there, for people who have lost people that they love to come and be there and be present and
feel as if they were contributing.
Exactly.
As well.
I think that felt quite empowering to people. We had hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, and almost all of them had lost someone or were a survivor themselves. And I think that's really empowering actually for people.
It is. So where do you go now? What are the what you're looking at now? Because you've done London Marathon, which is up here, isn't it? What's the next thing for you?
It's going to be a really busy and exciting 6 months, which is great. So we're hopefully not going to drop off on the momentum. Good. So we've got the National Cancer Plan, and we're really hoping that there's going to be a dedicated focus to cancers that have been left behind. So that's going to be something that we're working on with them, and obviously then to deliver it, we want to be a partner to the NHS and a partner to the government and make sure that we're contributing our piece. And then I think, and I don't think we've talked about this, but there's actually some legislation going through Parliament currently, which we're working on, called the Rare Cancers Bill. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
But it's specifically dedicated to increasing and incentivising more research into cancers like ours that have been left behind.
Yeah.
And excitingly, that's just gone to the House of Lords. So we'll be doing everything we can, working with a bunch of other charities, covering those other forgotten about cancers to get it through. And if it does, I believe it's going to be the first piece of cancer-specific legislation in over a decade.
Wow.
So yeah, that's going to be...
That's a damning thing, isn't it, as well?
Well, yeah, definitely. But I think it could really make a difference to driving research in this area.
What's amazing, Alfie, is that you guys, you talk a lot, not just about your cancer, but you're talking about all the other cancers that are left behind as well, Rishi. That's amazing, isn't it? That they're not just focusing on their own little area. There's so much else in the kind of bigger, broader picture to focus on.
Yes, absolutely fantastic. I think as Alfie, as you said earlier, I think it's the way you sort of have to approach it, really. There are so many similarities, and there's so many, like I said, with some of those other cancers that have been left behind. There's so many of those groups. I think it's really important to be working together, and I think realistically that's the only way that we're going to be able to achieve significant change is through working together. If everybody's off trying to do their own thing, it makes it very difficult to achieve that wider change that we need to be able to try and improve some of this outcomes for people and improve survival rates in some of these cancers. So yeah, I think it's absolutely fantastic.
I think it's also, not only is it more practical, but it also makes biological sense often because, let's say, stomach, esophageal, liver, they're all really hard to diagnose. They all have those vague symptom challenges that pancreatic has. And so thinking about, these are similar challenges that need to be overcome for these cancer types. So let's develop policy responses and clinical interventions that address those similarities.
It's far easier for government to address that, isn't it? Far more attractive, I imagine, for them to address rather than just say we're going to work with this one charity or this one area. Yeah,
and we're living longer. We are more likely to develop long-term conditions and cancer, and therefore we also need to, in my opinion, develop a health system that responds to that. And caters to the fact that you're probably going to need multiple interventions for different things at different points in your life. And so, that's why we feel really passionately that we need to be thinking about it in that way.
Just to wrap up, give me one big takeaway from each of you for, the ordinary members of the public listening. One takeaway for them. One takeaway for healthcare professionals, be it GPs or anybody else. Give us, one takeaway from each of you.
I think for the public, I think it's really important. I know we touched on family history a fair bit over this podcast, and I think there's something that the public can do as well, which is to be proactive around that, and actually just have some of those conversations within your own families. I think a lot of the time, if you sort of going back to your sort of grandparents, sometimes you don't necessarily, they may have died because of old age or whatever it might have been. Actually have some of those conversations and find out why. It could well be that it's because of a cancer and it wasn't really mentioned back then. So I think actually being proactive around some of that family history is a really good way that you can do something to sort of understand your own risk and then go more informed to your GP and help your GP out a little bit as well. So I think that's certainly something that I would say is a takeaway, and again, it's one of those things useful for pancreatic cancer, but useful for all sorts of cancers. And just really sort of equips you to be able to I guess, invest the best in your own sort of personal care. And then I think, for the healthcare professionals, let me keep it on the same line for this. So I think it's having those conversations. It's certainly something that we encouraged people, the GPs, to do around pancreatic cancer and EUROPAC study when we were pushing some of the information out around that. But it's just to have that conversation. I know a lot of the time it's not recorded particularly well in GP records. Maybe if you can, include it in your sort of new, even if you can start including it in new patient meetings that you have, just to have that conversation, get it all recorded on the system, and I think that will really help, again, across the board.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that for both audiences. I suppose what I'd say to members of the public is I really do believe that we're on the cusp of some major change on pancreatic cancer. And, you know, if you've been affected by pancreatic cancer, like, this isn't a lost cause. There's a lot that's really exciting that's coming down the line in the next few years, and I feel really confident that we're going to start to, you know, give people a much better shot at a longer life. And for healthcare professionals, I'd say, you know, try and remember pancreatic cancer, and the support that's on offer, and hopefully more support coming down the line with the cancer plan, with the case finding pilot, with EUROPAC. When you look at all of that and you step back, you think, oh, actually there is stuff that we can do here. And you know, that it's not something that you can't do anything about. And people often say, you know, I was written off by my healthcare professional once I'd been diagnosed, but it doesn't need to be like that. And you know, if healthcare professionals want to find out more and learn more about pancreatic cancer, we put on training and webinar at the organisation, which is all about helping to train people. I totally understand that GPs have to do an incredible job and be across so many things, but actually we're here to help, and if you want to learn more, we have support on offer.
Not just support, I imagine, for GPs, your website, I imagine, signpost people to things.
Yep, definitely.
You know, just a general advice, symptom advice, that kind of thing.
Yep, and I would say, you know, we've got that helpline with clinical nurse specialists who provide a huge amount of information and help to people directly. So if you don't have the answers as a GP, that's okay. We're here to help, and we're also here to help people throughout their journey. So we're actually, you know, providing support through WhatsApp, helping people navigate, you know, what's often some of the hardest times in their life. So yeah, that's also on offer.
Wonderful. Well, Alfie and Rishi, thank you so much. Alfie, thanks for having us at your lovely office.
Oh, no worries.
Great to come and see you. Rishi, thank you as well.
Thank you.